But a part of me was like, yeah, what do you think's going to happen when you're supporting killing people every single day? When you have sanctions on Iraq, you killed 500,000 children under the age of 5.
There was a concerted and very coordinated effort after 9/11 to put Muslims on the defensive so that they're not thinking about what's actually going on in the homelands, but they're thinking about the fact that, oh, we are the ones who are the extremists and we need to defend ourselves. We need to shut down any voices that have like extremism in them. So all of our focus went into apologetics and defending the fact that this religion is all about peace. And that's where you get like discussions such as, oh, Islam means peace. What do you think like people should do in terms of their relationship with this country? Like, is it possible to be a Muslim and at the same time really care about America, really be patriotic? Or do you have to pick one or the other?
There was this young man at New York University who he mentioned Gaza, and then the school said we apologized to the crowd, we subjected them to propaganda. The crowd was roaring in approval. They said Palestinians don't believe that Hamas committed atrocities on October 7th.
Piers Morgan, for example, calling this a genocide or now changing his opinions. And some people online are like, yeah, look, we did it. Piers Morgan's changed his opinion. But it's like, look at everything has already been done. Like the entire Gaza has been completely destroyed. Does the US control Israel or does Israel control US? Great to have you. Thank you for coming on. We're very excited to have you on today. And inshallah, I'm looking forward to the discussion. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I've had you as a teacher many years ago, and I think your work as a teacher has impacted many people. I've talked to people across different generations, and they've mentioned that they've been transformed by what you've been able to do with them. And I think that really stems from the fact that you have a fire inside of you, you have a passion. It's not just the knowledge is there, but the internal passion that you have is what really sparks people's interest and passion as well. So you've been teaching at IOK, Institute of Knowledge, for how many years now?
Since 2011.
2011, so we're almost at 15 years.
I taught for 2 years before that in Fresno.
In Fresno, okay. So you've been teaching total for about 17 years?
I don't know the math. Yeah.
All right, so during this time, I'm sure you've evolved a lot as a teacher. Your own goals and your own understanding of how to deal with students has changed. And on top of that, students have probably changed across different generations too, like in terms of how they are. So I want to just take it to the beginning and start off with your own story. Learn about your family, your youth, your upbringing, how you became interested in the deen, how you became interested in politics. If you could just take it all the way from the beginning.
SubhanAllah.
We'll go through it.
One of the first, I don't know, I keep coming back to when I was a teenager and punk rock.
Hey.
You know, that's really, I don't know why, but that's what gave me so many kind of openings into different aspects of life, especially politics and caring about the world and things. Because I think I really got introduced to that when, in middle school, when you start to question a lot of things about life. So when it comes to, there's so many directions to go in. I don't know how to really focus on one thing, but I would say that when it comes to teaching in middle school, I was bullied a lot. And that was something that really bothered me because I always tell the kids, and I've said it since I was younger, that when there's bullying happening in a classroom, it's like there's a fire in the middle of the classroom and everybody can see it except for the teacher. And now as an adult, I think that teachers can definitely see it too. They just don't know how to deal with it. And I put myself in that camp too. It's a lot harder than I think I imagined it when I was a kid because, sometimes you help a kid out and you just put a bigger label on them. When I say help them out, I mean intervene directly. You always want to help them out. But sometimes it's better to initiate conversations one-on-one to check in with kids. And then sometimes they don't really know how to take that invitation to open up. It's really tough.
Okay.
But that was one of my primary motivations for being a teacher. And I can also say, alhamdulillah, that it's not just difficult, but it's very rewarding when that does happen. You know, bullying, it doesn't go away. But when I've been able to help kids who go through that, I'm sure that there's some kids that I haven't been able to help them enough. May Allah Ta'ala forgive me and make them strong. But when I do get it right, it's very rewarding.
Right.
So that was one of the things that really was a motivator amongst so many other things. But I think that as a young person, the whole punk rock scene emphasized how phony everything is. And then when I entered into high school, I had all these friends who are going to become doctors and they all want to become, you know, whatever. And I remember just going to this one event because I had a friend, Muslim friend, and he did everything right in high school. He had all the AP classes and mashallah, he was on top of things. You know, I don't fault him at all for that. But sometimes he would take me along to those events that they had. And I remember one specific event where they were gift wrapping Christmas presents for orphans. And I didn't want to really go, but my friend was going, so I was like, okay, I'll go. And then we got to this person's house, and there were all the, you know, ASB kids or whatever, and they were all there. And I went there, I was religious by that time. So I was like, oh, I want to help orphans. You know, this is something important to Deen. And just the people were there for, I think one thing also is I became really judgmental and I became religious, right? So I was like cutting everybody down as a teenager to make myself feel good, you know, improve my own self-esteem by saying everybody else is wrong. But for whatever happened, whatever reason, I went to this place and it just seemed like nobody there actually cared about what they were doing. They just cared about getting volunteer hours, hanging out with friends, and then like flirting with people that they knew from school, right? Like that was it. And after, I don't know why, but after that event, I was just like, I can't stand this stuff. And I wanted to be sincere in what I was doing, almost to a fault where like I didn't care about things that I should have cared about. You know what I mean? So that was one thing that I was like, I want to become a teacher because I don't want to go out and just make a bunch of money like other people.
Did you have that pressure from your family?
No, not really. So I think what happened was when I was like 15 or 14, I became really religious. And then when I was going to graduate high school, I wanted to go study Deen. And that was like my biggest thing. And my dad was like, no, just don't do that. Just get a college degree. So I think he was just happy as long as I had a college degree. And then as long as I did that, he didn't really, being a teacher was like, oh, that's great, do that. Right. Even though that was the same thing that I would have done if I had studied overseas, right? I'd come back and I'd be a teacher. But I don't know. So there wasn't that much pressure. And I was really happy about that. I studied history, again, like not really focusing on things I should have thought about in college. But it is what it is. So no pressure there. I studied history. Everybody else in the MSA, they were all doing, you know, medical path or engineering or something like that. But I was like, no, I want to study history. It's actually, I listened to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf lecture. He was talking about how we need more historians. And I got inspired by that. And I liked that. And I just really had this idea in my head that I want to do something. I bought into, in middle school, I forgot this teacher's name. I only had her for a few weeks in an elective course. She said, you always want to do something that makes you happy, not something that makes you money.
Right.
And I didn't know. I really bought into that. Yeah. I remember these, when I was studying at IOK and in college, there were these young, you know, Muslim American kids. And they're like, Thomas, what are you going to do? You're in college right now. I was like, I want to become a teacher. Like, you're going to be poor. What are you doing? And I was like, no, man, teacher's all right. They're like, nah, dude, you're going to have a hard time. And I was like, you guys are brainwashed. I mean, in some ways, you got to be practical. In other ways, I was really just like, I don't want to be a yuppie like other people and just make a ton of money and then die, because that leads you nowhere.
And do you connect this independent thinking that you had to the time you were being bullied and just realizing that you don't need to go along the path that everyone else is following?
Yeah. I remember after the worst of it was in middle school, but then in the beginning of high school, I was in a woodshop class. And in woodshop class, nobody does any work. So I was reading books. And I was reading this Islamic book. And I remember I came across, I don't know what surah it was, and I want to say it's the ayah in Surah Hadid, but maybe it was a different ayah, where Allah Ta'ala mentions how this world is a pomp and a show, and it's just, competing in wealth and children. And that hit me so hard, especially with the whole punk rock thing. Like, people are fake, and they just want to impress other people, and they don't realize how their actions are hurting other people, like really political stuff, which was excellent lessons. I mean, I still think that those, I listened to Bad Religion and Rage Against the Machine. It's not really a punk rock group, but these really heavy political and angry themes that it's truth about life,
right,
in many cases. So I remember just looking around in high school, and, that's what high school was for a lot of people. Again, it's kind of judgmental old me coming through, but that's how I perceive things. They're just doing this to impress other people and do what their parents say. They can live in a big house, and they don't really care about what's happening around the world, how people are suffering, and, what are the actual costs of our life that we have.
Yeah. And how did you overcome the bullying psychologically? Was it through becoming a rebel in high school?
A lot of it was that kind of, I don't care what anybody thinks,
right,
dealing with it. So that was, I guess, a way of coping with it. Ultimately, I became really depressed. And I think back to the music that I listened to at that age. It was two emotions: anger, a lot of anger, like political stuff, and just sadness.
The dark music that you were listening to.
And I don't think I really came out of that until I became religious. And then it made me realize you don't just suffer for nothing, right? There's a purpose to it. And there's, I don't want to say a light at the end of the tunnel, is cliche. But there is a meaning to it. You can turn it around and make it into something that's positive.
Right.
It's not just you just suffer through it. It's kind of builds your character in a sense.
Right. And so what was that journey of becoming religious? Did you grow up in a religious household? Your name is Thomas. People would assume that you're a convert.
Yeah, they often do.
But you're not a convert. So where did the name Thomas come from firstly?
In some ways, I don't know. So my mom converted to Islam when she married my dad. And my dad is immigrant from Lebanon. And my older brother, he has like a Muslim name. And my full name is Thomas Muhammad Alameddine. Growing up, I didn't know how to pronounce my name. I was actually mentioning this in a khutbah the other day, that like, how many of our kids are going to know how to pronounce their names when, generations from now? People would say, what's your name? My name's Alameddine. But that's like,
right.
I didn't know what it meant or anything. And so in fourth grade, this one kid was going around the room asking people like, what's your middle name? And I didn't even think anything. I was like, my name was Muhammad. He's like, what? And then he started going around the room saying, you know what his middle name is? His middle name is Muhammad. And people were like flipping out. I was like, what's wrong with that? So that was kind of, but usually like I was just a white kid. I had nothing to do with like, nobody saw me as an Arab growing up. So I didn't really deal with any of that. If anything, I would say that when I started going to the masjid, it was more like, oh, this is a white convert Muslim after 9/11 is an informant or something, kind of way of looking at things. Yeah, so when I was growing up, we would go to the Eid, and that was like, oftentimes my dad would have work. So we'd go for Salatul Eid, and then we'd just come home and like, that was it. If we got a day off from school, like that was cool. Sometimes we'd still go to school the rest of the day. That would suck. And sometimes we would get like video games and things like that. And I knew that I was Muslim, and we don't eat pork. That was one thing. Like, so whenever there was a class party, if there was like pepperoni pizza, like you can't have that because that's pork.
Yeah.
So that was pretty good because it
reinforces the idea that you're Muslim.
I knew that I'm Muslim. I remember, I think about this, I get so sad. When I was 10, there was this kid named Lorenzo in my class. And there was something with pork. And I was like, oh, I can't eat that. And he's like, why? And then I was like, I'm Muslim. He's like, oh, my dad's Muslim. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, but my parents, they got a divorce. And, I don't know if I should be Muslim or not. And this is so weird looking back at this. And I was like, oh, you should do it. You should stay Muslim. I don't know why. I mean, just like identity, like, yeah, you should do it. And then he was like, oh, but I really like pepperoni. And then I was like, yeah, but you should still do it. And he's like, all right, I think I'm going to try. I know that, like, that's so scary to me now as an adult. Like, that freaks me out so badly. I can't imagine being in a situation like that. And that just really, I don't know what to say. That's so scary as a parent to think like that. But that's what people there go through.
Yeah.
So then when I was growing up, because I had that kind of sense that I am a Muslim, alhamdulillah, because my mom, I remember one of my first religious lessons that I remember my mom teaching me, subhanAllah, I can remember in the hallway of our house, and she got down low and she's like, you can't see God. SubhanAllah. You can't see God. And sometimes she would sit with us and we would read the Quran in English. But these were like one-off things, right? Like she might have tried to teach us, but I was a kid. I didn't want to do that. I want to go do something else. So it didn't really stick.
And she became Muslim before you were born?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
She became Muslim like right when they got married. But it's not like we didn't pray Salah together or anything like this. I would always see my dad. He'd come home from work, he'd take a shower, and then he would make up all of his Salah. But I didn't know what he was doing. All I knew is that he would wrap a towel around himself and he'd pray the prayers. And I, honest to God, I thought growing up that like you're supposed to pray in a towel and like no shirt on.
That's funny.
But I always used to see him doing that. And I asked my mom, like, what's dad doing? She'd be like, oh, he's praying. I didn't know what it was. And then, so what was so funny is like when I was 10, I remember I went to the library and we got a book that said Islam. And I was like, oh, it says Islam. And it talked about the 5 pillars of Islam. I was like, whoa, there are 5 pillars of Islam. Like, I didn't even know that. That's wild to me thinking about that now. I remember reading, I used to love, classic stories. So I bought Sinbad, the Tales of Sinbad. And I remember reading it and it said Allah. And I was like, whoa, Mom, this says Allah in it, and I was really freaking out. And so in some ways when people, they say I'm a convert, I kind of say like, yeah, maybe a little bit. What happened was my dad, he went for Hajj when I was about like 12. And again, I didn't really know what Hajj was. All I knew is that he was gone for a long time and he went to Lebanon afterwards and then he came back. When he came back from Hajj, my mom started wearing hijab. He started going for Jumu'ah. He started taking me for Jumu'ah. And then that really was a blessing I think about now. SubhanAllah, if I didn't have that, what would have happened?
This is around the time that you're getting bullied as well.
Yeah. This is kind of like, I didn't even think of it. I was just like, oh, I have to go this place with my dad. Like, we have to go here. And it was just kind of in the background. The big thing in my life was going to school and getting bullied and all that. But that was important. And then when I was 13, I used to love to read. So my dad, it was actually in Dhul Hijjah, which are in Dhul Hijjah right now. I talked about this the other day in the khutbah. And my dad was all like, I didn't really have a great relationship with my dad, but alhamdulillah, he did this. He would read Quran every morning. And he didn't really read with tajweed. Like he would just recite quietly, just like he was reading a book. I mean, I didn't have any conception of like recite the Quran. It was just, this is a book that my dad reads every morning. And then he looked up from his Quran. He's like, you should read the Quran and do good deeds because in Dhul Hijjah, I didn't know what Dhul Hijjah was. I mean, I said, this is, there's one time we go for Eid, that's after Ramadan, we have to fast. And I fasted since I was a kid. That was one thing that we used to do. We would fast. That was an important, like, ritual. And then there's this other Eid that, like, just comes out of nowhere. We don't have any fasting or anything, like, just pops up. So, anyways, he said, these are the 10 days. It's good to do good deeds, so you should read the Quran in English. And then I started doing it. And I would read, it was an Arabic English Quran, and you're supposed to read it from right to left, but I read it from left to right, and it made no sense.
Yeah.
And I was like confused, and I went to my dad. He's like, no, just keep reading it. You want to read the small surahs in the back, so it's okay. And it was totally backwards. But eventually I realized, okay, there was something in it that made me want to keep on reading it. It's the Quran, it's a special book. So eventually I figured it out and I started reading it. And then I think that kind of planted the seeds. And then a couple years later, I always thought of myself as Muslim, alhamdulillah. But then a couple years later, I realized, okay, if I'm really Muslim, it means that I don't just live the same way and call myself Muslim. It means like there's stuff I'm going to do. And that's when I started like learning about Islam and really changing my life around. But I would give the example the other day to the people how like my dad, he couldn't read Quran with tajweed properly. And then you fast forward, like I started reading the Quran in English backwards when I was 13. And now my daughter, she's 13, she memorized the whole Quran. First person in our family in Lebanon or over here. That's a huge blessing, subhanAllah. I mean, Allah reward my father for that, because, if he just told me read the Quran, I wouldn't have done it. But I saw him reading it every single day. And he did that until he died. He would always read the Quran every single morning, mashallah. So that's a beautiful thing that he did for us.
Yeah, and those memories and images that you have of your dad praying after he comes back from work with the towel on, those all came to benefit you at the end. And now, inshallah, it'll be a generational.
My mom teaching me, alhamdulillah.
Absolutely. So as you are growing up, what are some key moments or key findings about the deen that make you like really attached to it, where you start actually taking the journey seriously, you start getting teachers, and you start studying more to learn about what this deen is all about?
So when I was in that woodshop class, I would say that was like the biggest moment in my life, when I kind of had an epiphany and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this now. And this is a beautiful thing, and it's changed my life around. And then, but I didn't really know what that meant. Like the book talked about praying and stuff, and I was trying to pray. But then I think what really had a huge impact was my dad had a friend. He passed away, rahimahullah. And so much of what we learned about Islam was really from this brother, because, you have good friends, it has an impact. This person had a big impact on my dad, and he had an impact on us. So like, I remember going to his house and they were talking about eating halal meat. And this was the first time like I'd ever, like, I didn't know what that was. I didn't care either. But like my dad was talking about like, oh, what were you guys discussing? We were talking about halal meat. Like, what is that? And my dad didn't think people should eat halal meat. Like, it's okay. We can eat whatever meat. They were having a discussion. And this brother, I remember one time he came to our house and he had photographs that they had just gone for Umrah. We're like, what's Umrah? It's like, oh, people, they go to Mecca like any time of the year. Like I was like, people do that? SubhanAllah. Anyway, so we were at this brother's house, and then I don't know how, but I got into, he had these boxes of old books that I guess he had it in like storage. And one of them was Fazali Hamel. This is the Tablighi book. And anyways, so I opened it up at random, and I came across two stories that really, I don't know if I read both of them at that time, but I remember reading one about Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, the first time he gave a khutbah in Islam, and they beat him. And they broke his nose, and they even flattened his nose. And then the first thing he said when he came out of his unconsciousness was, how's Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? And I remember I was reading that book, and I was like, dang, this is amazing. Like I was so sucked into it. And then there was also the story of Sayyidina Abu Dhar, how he came and he said the shahada outside the Kaaba.
Right.
And it resonated with me so much, especially like, I don't want to compare the Sahaba Kiram to like what I was listening to with the music and stuff, but this idea of, I'm just going to say it what it is, and if you don't like it, it's too bad for you. I loved that. And it just spoke to me so much. And I was reading the book, and then the uncle came and he was like, you want to take that book? And I was like, yeah. And then he gave it to me. And he also gave me Fazali Sadaqat. And I took those books. I had no idea what Tabligh was. And now, like looking back, I remember that there was some Tablighi brothers who visited his house when we were there one night. And like it wasn't anything important, but like there were these guys with these big beards who were there, and they were talking to my dad and stuff. And then I was like, who are they? Oh, there's some guys who came in, like, I didn't understand. But like looking back, I realized what that was now. And subhanAllah, so I took those 2 books and I read them straight through. And it was amazing. I remember I was just so, like, it completely changed how I thought about what Islam was and everything. And that's when my parents started getting kind of freaked out, like, Thomas is changing, you know, and it's a little too much. So before my dad was telling me to read Quran, now he's like, tell me, you know, you got to slow down.
Yeah.
It became a source of contention a little bit. And then, what happened next, I started listening to lectures online a lot. At that point, there was very few lectures online, like just a few MP3s.
This is pre-YouTube.
Oh my God, yeah. This is, yeah.
Talking about the 90s. Not the 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. So I graduated, when did I graduate high school? In 2004. So this is like 2002, 2003-ish. Yeah, so I was reading the Q&A on islamonline.net, and that really sucked me in. And it made me like halal and haram. So then that's when I started going to my parents and being like, you know, this is halal and this is haram. And we'd go to other Muslim friends' house. And then I became like, you know, sometimes people make fun of young folks. They call them like little sheikh or Maulana, stuff like that. So I started hearing that from some people. And the other thing that is that Islam online, the big thing happening at that time was the second Intifada. So that got me really, I mean, I was already into politics because of the whole punk rock thing. But, and also, I mean, I didn't really mention it, but the punk rock thing evolved into learning about, through my older brother, people like Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein. There was this old website called ZNet that had a lot of political comment, like hardcore leftist political commentary. And that really had a big impact on me. But this was the first time it was like political commentary that was not from that orientation. And a lot of it was like from Muslim Americans. And Palestine became my thing. This was even before 9/11 happened. So every day I would read the Q&A on that website, and I'd read the news on that website. And I started really getting, I cared a lot about the Palestinian cause. That's kind of a different story. But anyways, I got really into the halal and haram. Eventually, at the masjid, I got a book by Dr. Qaradawi called Al-Halal wal-Haram fil Islam. And there's some things controversial about that book, but I loved it. And I read that thing, and it was awesome. I started reading other books at the time. They had a bookshop outside the masjid that I went to. We bought a lot of books from there. And then things started getting, like like I said, my dad wanted me to calm down a little bit. 9/11 happened, and they got really freaked out. A few times before 9/11, I would even go to school wearing like shalwar kameez that my dad's friend got me. And then my parents like, you can't do that anymore. And yeah, everything got crazy. SubhanAllah.
So let's actually just jump into that, the politics side of this.
Yeah.
What years were you looking into the Palestine cause? Was it like the late 90s now?
No. This is early 2000s.
Early 2000s, okay.
This is, I forgot exactly when the second Intifada broke out, but it had been going for a while, and then 9/11 happened. And I just remember, like, when 9/11 happened, I was kind of like, I hate to say this, but it was like, well, what do you think's going to happen when you're doing this stuff all around the world, right? Because that was a big question people were asking, like, why do they hate us so much? And then instead of asking, like, how can we stop this violence? And then that was really where the Noam Chomsky stuff was so beneficial, because he talked about legitimate grievances, and it wasn't some kind of angry discourse. Not that Muslims had an angry discourse, But a part of me was like, yeah, what do you think's going to happen when you're supporting killing people every single day? When you have sanctions on Iraq, you killed 500,000 children under the age of 5. You know, having that kind of discourse in my mind, which is also something that these other people were bringing up, but then talking about it in a way that was really, I would say, more palatable to Americans.
Oh.
And I really kind of got sucked into that. We had an excellent teacher at Glendora High School. His name was Mr. Saunders. And Mr. Saunders used to teach classes on government. And I remember there was this one kid, this was when the war in Iraq was going off. I was a junior in high school, and he sat next to me in English class. And he was a really funny guy, really well liked by everybody. He was a nice guy, but it was so funny because there was just this huge change in him. So that year, he would always talk to me about the war in Iraq. And I remember he had one day in class, he was just joking around with me, but he's like, Thomas, look, this is Iraq and this is America. It's like, he's like, you know, he's swinging around. But it was really, I was like, people are dying, you know, you shouldn't joke like that. He wasn't being mean. He was just, you know, being kind of dumb. And then I tried to tell him a few things about the history of what happened in Iraq before, and also how they had nothing to do with 9/11, and what happened, you know, before 9/11 with respect to Afghanistan, and how we supported people like Osama bin Laden, stuff like that. And he was just like, yeah, whatever. Anyways, fast forward to the next year, he took a class with Mr. Saunders. And I remember I saw him, I hadn't seen him in a long time. He comes to me in the hallway, he goes, Thomas, we are bad people. I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, the United States, we did so many bad things around the world. Like all the stuff you were telling me last year, like I totally believe it now. Mr. Saunders had a huge effect on all of us. You know, it's funny because I don't think of Mr. Saunders as much because I only had him for a brief amount of time, but he had a huge impact on my older brother, and then that really impacted me. Like I stopped standing for the Pledge of Allegiance when I was in middle school. It's kind of like a rebellious thing, but it was also because like the United States does bad things around the world. Like why am I gonna pledge allegiance to a flag where they're killing people? In any case, that was through Mr. Saunders. When 9/11 happened, when I joined high school, the first thing I did was I wanted to hang out with Mr. Saunders because my brother would always talk about him. He had a lunchtime club, Amnesty International, and we're gonna, you know, stand up for human rights and stuff. I did that. And Mr. Saunders, it was so crazy because after 9/11, people were talking about they're gonna bomb Afghanistan back in the Stone Age, and just like nobody would listen to any kind of reason. It was nuts. I had freedom fries. I don't know if did you ever grow up? So like people were saying how we have to stop calling French fries. We're going to call them freedom fries now. That was actually a thing. And like some restaurants, they changed the menu to freedom fries. That is nuts, especially because like you learn in history about communism and the Red Scare, McCarthyism and all this stuff and how crazy they were, but it just keeps on, you know, happening. So Mr. Saunders, he had us have a protest against the impending bombing of Afghanistan, which was an extremely brave thing to do. I mean, looking back now, I don't know how he did stuff like that. But we organized a group of students, and we went outside David Dreyer, who was our representative at the time, and we held up signs saying no bombing to Afghanistan. And people honked the horn at us. They flipped us off. I mean, I was like 14, and these guys, they got out of their car and they stood next to us with this big American flag, like, you know, screw these guys. They're against the United States, and we're, you know, kind of intimidating a little bit. And Mr. Saunders was so cool. He was just calm about it. He's like, you know, it doesn't matter. They're there protesting too. Everybody has the right to protest. It's okay. Really amazing guy. And that had a huge impact. I remember in those meetings at lunchtime, he showed us video of what was happening in Iraq. This is before 9/11. He showed us what was happening with the sanctions. And he showed us like video of these kids who are sick in these Iraqi hospitals because they can't get medicine and stuff. Later on, the war in Iraq took place, and we had protests on campus. Again, just a handful of us, and we're holding it. We made signs, and I remember we had this picture of this Iraqi man. He was behind a desk. He had a pen in his hand. He was completely charred. And we're holding up signs with these pictures, and these kids would come to like, they'd make jokes about it and everything. And that really infuriated me. It was such a good experience though, because that's what you encounter. It was so good. Mr. Saunders, it's funny because I took his class for like one semester because he taught government. So it was only one semester that I had him. But all those times during lunch when he ran those clubs, and he did a debate on the war in Iraq with another really popular teacher at the school, he did amazing work. So stuff like that kind of inspired me to be a teacher. It was funny because when Mr. Saunders was doing those things, I didn't ever think about becoming a teacher. I was just thinking about what he was teaching.
Right.
But looking back, I mean, that had a huge impact on me.
Well, on this topic, when a person has the realization of U.S. foreign policy and they see what's been done all around the world, not just in the Muslim world, but in Latin America, in Indochina, so many different places, wars that happen in Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, it makes a person have a very difficult relationship with the U.S. government.
Yeah.
But we live in America. And there's another part of it where it's like, we live here, we live decent, comfortable lives. We enjoy the organization here. We enjoy the benefits of living here. And we can often be blinded to what happens at the edges of the empire, because the people that are in the belly of the empire are not going to be aware of what's going on in the edges. And that's how this whole apparatus is set up. So what do you think like people should do in terms of their relationship with this country? Like, is it possible to be a Muslim and at the same time really care about America, really be patriotic, or do you have to pick one or the other?
So that was one time we were coming back from Mexico, and this is after the war in Iraq, and the Border Patrol agent, he stopped our car and he looked in our car, and he saw everything was in order until he saw my mom with the hijab on. So he's like, let me see your IDs. So then we all pulled out our IDs, and I had my college ID. He said, oh, you go to college. What do you think about the war in Iraq? Which is like, whoa. I mean, but I didn't even think like he's asking me an inappropriate question. I was just like, I'm going to tell the truth. You know, it's like, I think the war in Iraq, it sucks. Like, it's not good. My parents got really upset. Yeah. And then he started asking me other questions and everything. And one of the things that he said was ridiculously, he's like, well, if you think that the country is so bad, then why don't you just stay in Mexico? Like, don't come back. And then I said, well, the whole point of this country is that you're supposed to improve it, make it better. And that's the Constitution. And like, you know, there's this famous quote by Thomas Jefferson that you have to have a revolution every now and then. And, you know, you have to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants, which is like going pretty far. But the idea is that you have to improve the country. So that's why we have free speech, is that we can improve the country. One time I was giving a khutbah, and it was after the killing of Tamir Rice. And I could not believe it. I had given the khutbah and about, you know, we have to stand up for justice in this country. I didn't think it was anything controversial at all. And then some of the older brothers, they stopped me outside as I was leaving, and they said, well, how can you say that this country's racist when we have Barack Obama as our president? And I was just so taken aback that Muslims would say something like that. I just did not, I mean, I had a hard time even thinking how to respond. It's so ridiculous. I mean, people are getting killed, 12-year-old boy killed in less than a second. And you're going to tell me that people, they already have all their rights. It just made me so angry. So I think that to answer that question directly is that it's obvious that real Americans, if they believe in the founding principles of this country, they would strive to make it better, to improve on a more perfect union. Not even saying that I believe in that necessarily, because a lot of that might just be kind of idealistic, and, you know, they wrote those ideals down as they were stealing land from Native Americans and enslaving people, you know, Africans. So I'm not endorsing that either, but it's just kind of common sense that you'd want things to improve. And then as a Muslim, that you command the good, forbid the evil. It's not in contradiction to, I mean, you're going to do that everywhere you go.
Right. Yeah. And I think the example that you gave of the person who was talking about Barack Obama and how we can't call this country racist, there was a concerted and very coordinated effort after 9/11 to put Muslims on the defensive so that they're not thinking about what's actually going on in the homelands. but they're thinking about the fact that, oh, we are the ones who are the extremists and we need to defend ourselves. We need to shut down any voices that have like extremism in them. So all of our focus went into apologetics and defending the fact that this religion is all about peace. And that's where you get like discussions such as, oh, Islam means peace.
Yeah.
So once people busy themselves with that, then they're no longer thinking about what's going on. And I think what makes the situation in Gaza different is that things are so obvious now. Everyone has so much exposure through social media, through watching 4K videos of the genocide happening, of people's limbs being blown off, of buildings falling apart. I don't think that existed during the time in Iraq. And there may have been 1 million people that died in Iraq. There may have been 500,000 kids that died in the 90s, under 5. But there were no videos. Like when you see a video, it's not a statistic anymore.
Yeah.
You're actually thinking about this person's mother, this person's father, this person's relatives, and it just has a completely different emotional impact. So what would you say, like having lived through that experience, 9/11 and the war on terror era, which should actually be called the war of terror, and then now seeing post-October 7th world?
I think when you mentioned the cameras, the first thing that came to me was how in the early 2000s, there was actually lots of groups, pro-Palestinian groups, that wanted to give people little camcorders so they could record these things. And then, cell phones happened and you can do that everywhere. And that really did make such a huge difference, at least in terms of our activism. At the same time, it's kind of like people, they make these statements, but on the ground over there, genocide's still happening, right? In any case, the biggest thing that I took away from 9/11 and that how it compares to today was just how, like I said before, how crazy it was at that time that people didn't accept obvious truth.
Yeah.
So one of the craziest things that happened to me was in college, I took Poli-Sci 101. I'll never forget this. This is like a few years after 9/11. This must have been in 2006, I want to say. It's after the cartoon controversy in Denmark.
Yeah.
So we were discussing that, and then the teacher made this wild statement where she said, well, it's just like 9/11, that they attacked us because they hate our freedoms. And I couldn't believe that she said, this is a big class, like 50 people in the class. And then, I did not like to talk in class, but my hand went up. And then she called on me. And then I told her, I said, you said that they attacked us because they hate our freedoms. But if you actually, they're political terrorists. So the definition of political terrorists is they're killing people in order to bring publicity to their cause. And they've been pretty open about their cause, that it's about, what happened in Iraq with the sanctions again, and then also occupying parts of the Middle East, like in Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, what's happened to Palestinians. And then she she said, that's the terrorist perspective. I think you're giving like the terrorist perspective. And people in the class got pissed off at me. There was ROTC guys in the class. And I'll never forget, there was this one girl who sat behind me. And I was like, okay, but you're saying that this is why they attacked you. There was a video that they put out where they said, if we want to attack them because of their freedoms, we would attack them, we would attack Sweden, and we would attack all these other places. We're not attacking America because they didn't take her name, but people were saying in the media, they attacked us because we have Britney Spears, which is bonkers. And nowadays, I think anybody would recognize that. But here we are in a college class, and the professor is saying that. And then I said, so that's not, they said why they did it, and it wasn't because of that. And this girl behind me, she snickered, and she said in this like fierce, angry voice, like, they don't have to say it. And now, it was so funny because you fast forward to like last year, and you had all these kids on TikTok, and they were at the Bin Laden letter, and they were like, this guy is making points, which is, he did something horrible. It's not good. I don't endorse that at all. But yeah, he had legitimate grievances. He had me freaking out. That's what they were saying that whole time. And you were busy talking about freedom fries and Britney Spears. And now we've come, this far, we can recognize that as being total nonsense. And the same thing is going to happen down the line today. You're looking at these kids in the commencement speeches at these colleges, and And people are, they got rid of the commencement address at USC, I think, right? They don't even have it anymore. There was this young man at New York University who he mentioned Gaza, and then the school said, we apologize to the crowd. We subjected them to propaganda. The crowd was roaring in approval. The MIT speech recently.
They're powerful moments.
Subhanallah. It makes you want to cry. Just saying a simple truth.
Yeah, and seeing crowds acknowledge that truth.
Seeing the young lady who was attacked by that mob in New York outside the synagogue when the Israeli Secretary of Defense or Minister of Defense, Ben-Gvir, came, and they were like hitting her and they're chanting death to Arabs. There's no way that anybody can look at this 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and not realize these people are just like the Freedom Riders and the people in the 1960s. It's this. As soon as I saw that young lady and the crowds following her, I just thought about the Little Rock Nine and how these people had their faces angry, full of hate, following that. I forgot the lady's name now. Following her around on the first day of school in Arkansas, and that's what it's going to be. So seeing that in 9/11, seeing that with the war in Iraq, people literally believed that they had found weapons of mass destruction, because on Fox News at that time, they always had these breaking news alerts that they just found something, and it'd always be something they actually hadn't found.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, he said something during a presidential debate and on television. And I think it was I forgot the numbers, 3 million people, they heard that remark. It was an outright lie. His campaign published a correction in the New York Times later on, a week later, a few days later, I don't remember the details. And that was read by a few 100,000 people. One of the people in his campaign said, that's a net win for us. 3 million people heard the information we wanted them to hear, and only a few 100,000, they heard what it actually was. So we actually got the narrative that we wanted out there.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's not a mistake. It's done on purpose. You still have people this last week talking about 40 beheaded babies from October 7th.
Right.
It's done on purpose. It's done on purpose. I saw a poll. They were talking about how they said Palestinians don't believe that Hamas committed atrocities on October 7th. And then people in comments I can't believe they're so brainwashed. These people are nuts. I was like, well, what do you want them to believe? 40 beheaded babies? Babies in the ovens, that didn't happen. These women who were raped, they can't name a single victim. One of the women who came back from captivity, she got raped in Israel. And she said she was safer when she was in Gaza. And it's so funny because people are they're so brainwashed. Wow. And it's all gonna come to light eventually, just like it did before. So that's the one thing I would take away, is that it's crazy right now.
Yeah.
But then eventually people are going to acknowledge it. Okay, well, you can accept that. How do we stop the genocide though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because there's moments where we feel like it's a victory in the sense that the world opinion has shifted, but then on the ground, the genocide is still taking place. And that overshadows any type of public opinion changing. So
the war in Iraq, I went to the February 15th protest. You had 90% of the world was against the war in Iraq before it happened. They said, all this bad stuff's going to happen. Don't do it. They did it. And then I remember something 10 years, I don't know how many years later, there was another poll that I saw on the news that 90%, so at that time, it was 90% of the world was against the war. Inside America, internal polling, it was 90% plus was in favor of war in Iraq. Later on, shifted. And now you have 90% of Americans, they thought that the war in Iraq was a failure. And you're okay, I guess we were right. But it didn't do anything because it's already done. That's horrible.
Right.
And what do you do now? And then we see it happening in so many other ways.
Yeah, and it's now you see Piers Morgan, for example, calling this a genocide or now changing his opinions. And some people online are yeah, look, we did it. Piers Morgan's changed his opinion. But it's look at everything has already been done. The entire Gaza has been completely destroyed. More than 80-90% of the buildings have been destroyed. The hospitals are destroyed. People have been kicked out of their homes. They're living in tents. So many amputees. People's lives are destroyed over there. And so that's why the public opinion changing is a victory in the sense that long-term, people will always have this negative perception of what's been done, and people will have the understanding of like the correct side of history. But on the ground right now, it's not a victory. What do you think about the public opinion shifting and what effect that has?
Yeah, so after October 7th, we had Indigenous Peoples Day like a week later. And I remember I told my daughter, at some point down the line, everybody is going to say that this was a wrong thing. Just like how now you have Microsoft and Google, they do these land acknowledgements, but now they're helping the genocide. It becomes easy later on, and it's so sickening. Martin Luther King Jr., I always tell the kids that when he was doing his work, the majority of people of color in the United States didn't like him. He's a rebel rouser. He's not good. He's causing problems for us. He's making it hard. And then afterwards, everybody supports him. I was reading something the other day that the French resistance against the Nazis, after the Nazis lost, everybody was part of the French resistance. Everybody and their brother, they said that they were in on it. Whereas when you go back to the history of it, it wasn't. It was unpopular. A lot of people, they couldn't, and they would risk their lives to do that. So that's a very extreme example. After JFK got killed, he had statistically impossible numbers of people said they voted for JFK. So, after the event, everybody's going to be against what happened in Gaza.
Yeah.
It's just so terrible. And then it makes me so sad because is this ever going to stop, that people become more intelligent, that they don't let these things happen?
Historically, I think it's the opposite, right? Like with more technology that can destroy more people, it's just getting worse and worse. If you look throughout history and survey the centuries, the 20th century was the bloodiest century. You had World War I, World War II, where these mass weapons of destruction are being used.
But when are people going to stop believing it too, right? Like, because you see these accounts get degraded on social media. And, I thought after the war in Iraq, people, they could see through the government's lies. Well, people earlier than my generation, they lived through Vietnam, the stuff in Latin America. That's what Dr. Saunders, or Mr. Saunders, talked to us about, was what happened in Latin America, and he could see through it. But why is it that other people, they can't? And then you start to realize they don't want to.
Oh.
They're 100% supporting some of this stuff. And that's super scary. So when they get up there, when Joe Biden and these others, they get up there and they say 40 beheaded babies, they know exactly what they're doing. We used to say, if only Americans knew. There used to be a website, if only Americans knew about Israel and Palestine. There's a lot of people who do know, and they are plenty happy with it.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, and I think like at the end of the day, the population, the masses may be changing their opinion on things after the war in Iraq and what's happening in Gaza. But at the end of the day, ultimately it comes down to the people that have the weapons, people that have the money, and they know the evil that they're doing as well, but they're doing it for their benefit because it's filling their pockets. You have the military-industrial complex. You have Israel, basically a settler colony right from the beginning. And their goal right from the beginning, from 100 years ago, was to ethnically cleanse the people, because there's no way for a settler colony to be successful unless you have ethnically cleansed or genocided the people.
That was always out in the open.
Right. And it's been happening step by step. Like, it's very formulaic. It's nothing different. But they don't care that there's evil being committed. Even the people in Israel, they've been so brainwashed. I think recent polls were showing that about 80% are completely fine with what's happening in Gaza. Any protests that happen in Israel are just for the hostages. They're not necessarily about what's happening, the destruction that's happening.
Yeah. Or it's political, that they don't want to get sanctions and become a pariah. You had what's his name, Ehud Olmert, who did the thing in 2008, and he's coming out like, oh, we're killing people. Well, you did it too. It's just to put an alternative, say it's Netanyahu, like Bernie Sanders says it's Netanyahu's war, when it's Israel, it's not Netanyahu.
Right.
And it's shameful.
Yeah. What do you think is at the center of all this? Is it the military-industrial complex? Is it the corporatists that are able to benefit from all this? Is it just defending Israel? Like, what is causing all of these things to keep running?
Well, I mean, in the United States, what's so funny is we mentioned the war in Iraq, and now a lot of those neocons, they're anti-Trump, and they join, Democrats. And Democrats were always in favor of the war in Iraq too, but they were supposed to be the lesser of two evils back then. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that you have these people who they're criticizing Trump, who's not good, but they were the ones who were, David Frum. These were the ones who were the architects of the war in Iraq. They're not, better than Trump. So yeah, in one sense, there's this whole kind of American exceptionalism, and we're going to do what we want around the world because we have the power. There's a military-industrial complex that it helps these corporations and it keeps our economy going. And then there's also the evangelical community that it's a big voting bloc, and it provides votes, and they have really crazy beliefs about the Middle East. It's all of those things.
Yeah. Now, here's another question about this topic is, does the U.S. control Israel, or does Israel control U.S.? I think majority people would now, especially with John Mearsheimer's work, a lot of people would say that the Israel lobby has pretty much controlled and taken American foreign policy and politics captive. Whereas another approach, which I actually heard from Raja Abdul Haq, who is also speaking at the Aqsa conference, he actually firmly believes that the U.S. controls Israel. And it's at the end of the day, the U.S. is the big dog, and Israel is the one that's at the behest of America.
Well, does Mearsheimer really say that Israel controls America, or it has an influence on the electoral politics? Because when we say, so for example, we say that the war in Iraq, some people would point out, well, that didn't actually benefit America because we spent, I don't even know how much it was, like $1 trillion, and we only got a few $1 billion back out of oil revenue. But that's when you don't take into account the class dynamics. So yeah, America, they sent a lot of poor citizens to go there and fight and to commit atrocities and to kill people, and they spent taxpayer money to go do that, to the tune of $1 trillion or whatever it was. I don't know how much it was, exorbitant amount. I remember George Bush said it was going to be like $7 billion. And that was a whole other controversy. Like all these little tiny details, they get forgotten. It's just ridiculous. But the hundreds of billions that came back in oil revenue, so who did that benefit? That benefited the people in Halliburton, Dick Cheney, the people on top. So they did make a ton of money. So when we say that, Israel influencing electoral politics, they're controlling America. No, there's a small sliver of people who vote, and they're influencing them, and not even the people who vote, because some of these congressmen, they're being, they're ignoring their voters, right?
Right.
So I don't think anybody could really say that Israel controls America. I think that's, it almost gets to the point of conspiratorial, and I don't want to say, how can I say it? Growing up, I was always very sensitive to real anti-Semitism. So when people say things like the Jews control the media, obviously that's anti-Semitic, that's racist. It's not Jewish people. It's not just Zionist either. It's American corporate media. They push out a certain narrative. Give you an example. The most popular program on MSNBC during the war in Iraq was Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue, he ran programs against the war in Iraq. The network said, okay, this is our most popular show, but we're going to cut it because we don't want to be perceived as anti-American. I remember he did a segment he had Ehud Barak on, another former Israeli prime minister, and he asked him some tough questions. And the next day he showed the emails he got. It was a stack of papers that was huge. He didn't have his show cut off necessarily for that, although I'm sure that was part of it. But it was because the corporation not have anything to do with Jewish people. It's a corporation. They're looking out for their interests because they want to make money. They said, if we're perceived as anti-American, we're not going to make as much money, so we're going to cut that show. Has nothing to do with the identity of people in the media.
Right.
So I've always been super sensitive to that kind of conspiratorial thinking. Not saying that what you had alluded to is anything like that, but I think it's just kind of ridiculous, the idea that Israel is controlling the United States. I think that we have a lot of politicians who don't listen to their electorate because we have an oligarchy.
Right.
And you can buy politicians. We have legalized bribery in this country with lobbyists and things of that nature. It's not about Israel controlling us. It's about money and moneyed interests controlling the United States. And a part of that is the technology and the weapon sales, military, industrial, all the things that you mentioned.
Right. And so now bringing it back to our responsibility as Muslims, there's over 2 billion Muslims, and there's no shortage of wealth within the Muslims. I mean, the amount of zakat that's given every single year is an insane amount. I mean, that just goes to show how much wealth there is within the Ummah. There's a lot of natural resources within the Ummah. Muslim lands include many of the most geopolitical, like strategic areas within geopolitics. Yet, no one is able to do anything about this. And we're part of that at the end of the day. We can't say that we're not part of it at all. Would you say that the Ummah has collectively failed in Gaza? Or is another way to think about it that the people who are in charge have failed Gaza?
I mean, all these people dead, how could you think of it anything other than a failure? But then on the other hand, like, what are people going to do? What would be the course of action to take? That's, this is the question that everybody is stuck with. I don't know.
I mean, like, I always think to myself, I can't do anything, but if we have like an organized group of people and we're working together, we can do something. But who's going to create that organization to get millions of people together to actually make some movement? But then at the end of the day, it's like we're left to doing protesting or doing boycotting. And that's already been done again and again, but it hasn't stopped anything.
I mean, it didn't stop the war in Iraq either. So I remember in 2008, when they first bombed Gaza, I remember I went to the masjid, like Salat al-Asr, no one was there. I just cried. And like, everybody could see this is something that's wrong. These people, they had just been put under siege by that time. They were bombing them over, if I remember correctly, Thanksgiving and Christmas time. And nobody was caring. They weren't talking about it on the news. But I mean, the whole world can see it. And it just felt so powerless. And then I just thought to myself, well, what do we want for the people over there? What do we want them to be like? Do you want them to be like America? Well, America, the police, they kill unarmed African Americans all the time. You want them to be like France? At that time in France, you had these riots. The police were abusing folks from Algeria and stuff. They still do.
Right.
Okay, and I just started thinking about all these different countries. And there's no place in the world where everything is good, right? Because it's the dunya. It's never going to be perfect. And that's what utopia is. It's no place.
Yeah.
Does that mean that we just give up and we don't do anything to make it better? No. But at the same time, I think I do have to recognize that for myself, that you can't set up an impossible goal. There's never been a time and place in history where everything was just great. I remember when I was in 6th grade, they taught us about Pax Romana, Roman peace. And my teacher talked about it, how wonderful it was. And then later on, you learn that, well, that was peaceful for people in the interior of the empire. Right. But they were conquering all these other places, and they were killing people like crazy. And, I hate to say this too, like, we talk about Muslim history and how great it was and everything, but there's a lot of things that Muslims did that weren't. Imam Zayd Shakir, he used to say you have to take your double dose of Iman vitamin pills when you study Muslim history.
Right.
So there was never any time where things were perfect. And ultimately, that's why there has to be forgiveness on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. And that's what we should be seeking. So I one time I said to people, I said that this is the stuff that we should be, and I'm fall short of this, astaghfirullah, but this is what we should be seeking forgiveness for, is our collective failure for these types of big things, not feeding enough people in the world, not just in Palestine, anywhere in the world. We shouldn't be like, oh man, I blew up at my family again, or I missed Salah again. Like, these are things that are completely in our control. Allahu Alam for all of us. And again, I fall short of this. But if we can do all those things in our own lives, and then everything in the world, there's no way that we could all, it's never been.
Right.
And that's a sad thing to say, and it's horrible. But I don't think it means giving up. I think it means realizing that this is part of what it means to come into this world. That so we had this interesting debate topic the other day, ignorance is bliss. And like, how do you defend the idea that ignorance is bliss? Because one side has to defend that statement. And we said, well, you're just saying a statement of fact, that you could bury your head in the sand and it gives people a sense of relief. But if you want to change the world, or if you want to make a small change at least, then you can't do that. You have to say, all right, ignorance is bliss, but I'm not going to take that path. I'm going to recognize that all these problems still exist. I'm unable to change them on my own. But over time, I can contribute meaningfully so that I can stand before God and say that I did something.
Right.
I think that one thing that's really important is, in all of these issues, and it's so easy for me to say it because we're in the heart of the empire and we don't have any skin in the game. But a lot of these things, when you study history, the change takes place beyond a person's lifetime. So, I think about Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, he fought. He was born in the late 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. And he fought French, Japanese, the United States. And he died before, like, just a few years before they succeeded.
Yeah.
I mean, not that he's some kind of, it's so funny because when we studied him in college, I remember the professor, he asked everybody, he said, how many of you think that Ho Chi Minh is like a hero? And almost the whole class raised their hands like, I didn't mean to do that because he did a lot of bad things too. Whatever. Okay, fine. Every leader does bad things. Okay. But anyways, he died before that they were able to liberate Vietnam. And then if somebody asked him like, oh, was it worth it because you didn't live to see it? What'd he say? It doesn't matter. You do the right thing. Palestinian revolutionaries, I keep on thinking of this. Asad Abu Khadil, he puts this out on Twitter a lot. He says that they said this revolution is going to take 100 years or more. So if you don't have patience, stay out of it. We're talking about historical events. So in some ways, for us to say that we want to see the victory, it's kind of arrogant. It's just for us to feel relief. I mean, things in this world, they don't happen like that.
Right.
So for you to see the victory, well, who cares? Who are you? I say Sayyidina Hamza didn't see the victory. Sayyidina Mus'ab ibn Umair, Sayyidina Sumayya, she didn't see the victory, but it took place.
Right. And their sacrifices
made it possible.
Inspired generations to come after. You look at some of the great mujahideen of our ummah, including Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, Omar Mukhtar, even Izzuddin al-Qassam, all of these people that generations were inspired by, those people didn't actually see the final victory. They didn't see their lands being completely liberated. So I think our deen just gives us that framework that allows us to place this crazy situation that we're in into context. Like, I would say one thing when I see the suffering that's going on, one hadith that I always come back to is the one that talks about a person who lived their entire life in suffering and then they're dipped into paradise.
Yeah.
And then they're asked, did you ever face any suffering in your life? And then they say that I don't remember any suffering. And then the opposite happens as well with the person who had complete pleasure in this life. And then they're dipped into hellfire for just a moment. And then they're asked, did you feel any pleasure in your life? And they say, I don't remember any pleasure at all. So that idea and other principles, such as the fact that we're not working for this dunya. This isn't like the end all be all. We're not materialists. We don't think that like once we're dead, it's all over. The ultimate house, the ultimate abode, is in the next life.
Yeah.
And whether we see the victory here or not is secondary to what we have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's really like our deen just gives us a lot to give meaning to these events.
It's funny that you just mentioned the pleasure and all these things. One big influence on me in high school, and it's actually one of the things that shaped everything that came after, was reading Brave New World.
Yeah.
And in Brave New World, I don't know if you've read this.
Yes.
Marcus Mantle. So, everything is perfect, but a person could live their life with a full belly and have all the opportunities that they need. And they would still, assuming, we believe that if this person didn't have Iman, they'll wish their mother never gave birth to them in the next life, because they didn't know the truth and they denied it.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, if you take a nihilistic perspective and there is nothing, there's no meaning, just you obtain all this pleasure. Well, at the end of it, it's like you didn't even exist. There's no meaning to it. You'll never be remembered once everything is all gone. So why even be concerned about it?
Right.
So that just really gave me a lot of clarity that this is the right thing to do no matter what.
Right.
If you want your life to have meaning, you have to stand up for what's right. You have to take that idea of ignorance is bliss and throw it to the side. And, suffering and facing evil, this is worth it on its own.
Yeah.
So there's never going to come a time where we have a perfect world. And that's okay, because that's not why we do this. We do this because it's right.
All right. The last question I want to ask you on this is, how did the events following October 7th affect you personally? How did it affect the way you see the world? Or did it not affect you in the way that you had known all these things were happening from a long time before?
Like I said, I live comfortably over here in the West. I have no skin in the game. I don't know how, in some ways it feels like it shouldn't feel like this, but I think a lot of people online, it's like spectator sports almost.
Yeah.
Just not, because people are really dying and we have to raise awareness and such. But some of the arguments that people have, it's good to raise awareness and to drum things up, drum up support, but it's nothing like what people really have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Like I said, it causes, your heart to burn and you cry and you're thinking about it constantly. It's constantly on our minds, but it's nothing like people who have family and people who are there living it.
Right. Yeah, I think one thing that it did for a lot of people is that it made the world really black and white.
Mm.
Whereas we like to talk about gray areas and nuances within the world and try to understand differences amongst people and try to reconcile them. I think the events that happened after October 7th have just made the world very black and white in terms of good and evil, in terms of how these forces work with one another. And you see that online all the time. If people are not speaking out when this is happening, whether it's celebrities or sports people or politicians, then it just shows their character very deep down inside that they're not speaking out about this.
But we also don't want to see things in black and white though, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of scares me a little bit but it's genocide. So how could you not, like you said, condemn it? I'm just thinking about people that I know who they don't watch the news, or they do watch the news, but you know what I mean? And then, but we already said this, that people, if only they knew, it's not really going to make a difference because these people are still filling their pockets with money off of other people's deaths.
Right. Yep.
Damn.
Yep. So I think we can, inshallah, take a pause there. It's been a great discussion, very heavy discussion.
Yeah.
And I do also want to just say that your teaching has inspired me to go down the path that I've taken. I was in your class more than 10 years ago, probably about 13 years ago.
Mm.
And at that time, you were talking about these things that are happening now. You were talking about things that people are opening their eyes to now. And I just remember I was shocked, like hearing about the foreign policy of the US and the Muslim world. And it was very eye-opening. And from that day on, you know, I was able to understand how these things work. And now it's really just been like the outcome of everything that's been going on. So I want to thank you for that. And also just thank you for all the inspiration that you've been giving to young people around here. It's had a massive effect.
May Allah make the things you said true. Allahu Alam. Alhamdulillah.
I mean, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.